and welcome to Danger in Silence. So today, if you want to do a brief overview of what we're going to discuss, Hannah?
Yeah, so today we are going to be talking about horror movies because, wonderful, Halloween is coming. And a lot of my friends have really bad anxiety, as do I. But we love horror movies. So we kind of looked into why that might be and found some interesting things to share with you guys. But we would love to hear everyone's take on whether or not it helps with your anxiety, whether you find it soothing, or whether you find it nerve-wracking. I know Devon is a little more horror averse, and I am more horror obsessed. So I think we've got a good balance here to see both sides of the coin.
Yes, definitely. Horror adverse was a very kind word of saying that I am absolutely terrified of horror movies. But I did find out from our first podcast, you can put a little poll in the description of Spotify. So we should put some poll questions about, do you like horror? Do you not like horror? So that we can find out really how our audience feels. But I'm really excited to discuss the correlation with anxiety and horror movies. And like Hannah said, we have two very extremely different points of views because we have very different feelings about horror movies for our own personal self. So it'll be interesting to kind of have that conversation about what that looks like for each of us. And just real quick, I'm Devon Gross. I'm the coordinator of adult education here.
I'm Hannah Woodman. I am the helpline coordinator here at NAMI.
So awesome. So what do we want to get started with today?
So I thought that we could get started maybe talking a little bit about our feelings on horror and our backgrounds. I know that we'll talk a bit about recreational fear. So we all like peekaboo games and playing chase and tag. But speaking more about horror stories and films, I know personally for me, I used to watch The Twilight Zone like every day after preschool with my dad, and I loved it. And I'm a big lover in thrillers and monster movies. And I must say, The X-Files, in particular, the Monster of the Week episodes, I could rewatch 1,000 times and do. They're very good. But I like a good combination of like really a lot of jump scares. I want something with a really strong idea of like folklore. And I love dark humor in the films as well. When looking back over my favorite films in preparation for this episode, I also found something that thematically shows up in a lot of my rewatch favorites that I was not expecting, but makes a lot of sense when we talk about some of the articles that we read and some of the research that we heard about. And that is a happy ending, or an ending that makes sense, like something that has, wrongs have been righted. The person who's the good person survives, that there isn't a big thing I can't deal with is injustice at the end of films. So even if it's a beautiful, critically acclaimed film, I'll watch it once. We'll never rewatch it. I didn't realize how much a happy ending, and like it's 1 minute at the end of the movie, but that really does help me be like, yeah, I'm going to watch this 1,000,000 times. And we'll get into why that might be. But how about you, Devin?
That's really interesting because Thriller is like my absolutely worst, terrible, like nightmare of a movie. I will say if I'm going to watch a horror movie, monsters are a little bit better. I don't normally watch them. But definitely I am really, really freaked out by horror movies. I have a very overactive imagination. So if I see it on TV, I'm going to convince myself that it's actually going to happen in real life and picture it happening. A lot of imagery that comes with my anxiety. So if I see something, I'm more likely to be afraid of it because I have that imagery in my mind. So that is a big part of it. I also, it's interesting that you did mention the happy ending. I do think that, that again does play. I have seen horror movies in my life. Normally when my friends pressure me to go see them, which we will also talk about, is that no one should feel pressure to see a scary movie. But I feel like that happy ending does make a huge difference. Just to, as you talked about, we can discuss, the science behind it, but that does make a huge difference. Also, though, I did make a little note here because I did think about the fact that I love zombie movies and zombie TV shows. The Walking Dead is like my biggest comfort show. And so I don't necessarily classify them horror. I mean, they are horror movies, but they're a different genre of horror movies. And they do have to be well done. And I am more likely to watch a show that's a zombie show rather than a zombie movie. So just like kind of hypothesize that for a little bit. And I was thinking that part of it is that I do like a lot of things. It's about survival more than it is about the zombies, it feels almost. And there's just something very interesting and kind of relaxing to me about the thought of just surviving. Like I really enjoy the thought of watching people just trying to survive. I don't know. But it's just an interesting thing where with my anxiety, it actually I kind of really enjoy zombie movies, or apocalyptic movies, I guess would be in the same vein. It doesn't necessarily have to be zombies. But I also really, the difference too with it being TV shows is that you can really get that attachment to characters when you have, The Walking Dead has almost 200 episodes. So when you have that, you're getting attachment to characters, you're getting the backstory, you're getting, you have an empathetic experience with it all. You're getting so much more to it. It's not just the scary zombie parts. In most episodes of The Walking Dead, there's only a small portion of it, which is the more horror, scary part of it. So I found that is something over a 2-hour, there's so many emotions I feel like packed into a 2-hour film, that is where I don't like it as much. Don't like it as much is very understated. I really don't like horror movies.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I don't usually like the mass chaos films, but I will watch them because I'll watch any horror movie once. But there was a really cool part of our research that we found we're going to be talking a lot about the findings of the Recreational Fear Lab at Aarhus University in Denmark, because they are doing some very cool things these last 15 years. But a lot of people with anxiety, it is kind of common for them to enjoy horror. And that really comes from, there are a few different ideas of where that comes from. But in relation to the mass chaos idea is the fact that you can conceive of something terrible happening and then kind of learn or feel prepared for something similar to happen. And they did a study. Dr. Colin Scrivener, the researcher, will also be talking a lot about Matthias Clayson, who's also a doctor at the Recreational Fear Lab. He's cited in, I'm going to say, most of the articles that we found on this subject, because they really are one of the only ongoing research into reaction to fear on an international level. So they found in a 2020 study that people who watched scary films involving depictions of mass chaos, like alien invasions and apocalypse, said they felt more mentally prepared for the pandemic than people who didn't watch those films, which I just think is such a fascinating idea. And research also suggests that that's behind, you might see that true crime is really, really big. And we also know that the predominant viewers and listeners of true crime are women. And there's an idea that the desire to self-educate and be prepared for being the victim of a violent crime could be part of the reason why women are drawn to that, because we also tend to be targeted for crimes more than men. So there's more of this impetus to want to be prepared for the inevitable impossibility, which I found really interesting too. But that's similar from the Recreational Fear Lab, that they are doing some cool work. But I think that makes sense that if you're like maybe watching a thriller is really stressful, but something where you see people persevering in chaos and being able to survive and see them, heal and thrive and be able to live can be really empowering and can make you feel more in control in an uncontrollable situation.
Yeah, no, I definitely, find it really interesting. First of all, I started watching The Walking Dead after the pandemic, so I feel like I probably should have started before to really prepare myself. No, so that is such a great point. I definitely feel as though when I watch those apocalyptic shows and apocalyptic movies, I do feel more prepared. And obviously, I know that watching a TV show is not going to transfer over into real life skills because I am not the most likely to survive in a apocalyptic situation. However, I do feel much more prepared, and I do feel, when I watch those shows that I get ideas of what I would do and in that situation. And as you were saying, with women being more likely to watch true crime and listen to true crime, that kind of, it's the same kind of situation of trying to feel more prepared and stuff like that. But I did find interesting is that was cited by Dr. Cynthia Hoffner. And she was saying that horror is, people need to feel safe. They need to actually feel safe when they watch horror. And that kind of feels the same way when it ties back to true crime as well for me is I also feel the same way about true crime. Most of the time it really scares me. However, that's most of the time I'm on high alert anxiety. Most of the time I have very intense anxiety where my body is completely hypervigilant. However, if I have those times where I'm not hypervigilant, where I do feel calm, where I do feel safe, I am more likely to be able to watch true crime for fun or listen to true crime. And there are times that I can watch actual horror movies. So you bringing that up did just remind me about the fact that there are some times that I can, but I think that's the biggest thing is you have to actually feel safe and you actually have to feel like it's not imminent danger, that this is not going to affect you. And I think that is such an important thing.
Yeah, I think safety is a big thing when we talk about horror. And I know for me, it's a big party activity. So, ladies' nights now that I grow up, it's usually charcuterie and horror films that we watch together. And I always, at the end of every one, no matter what the ending is like, I pre-prep a palate cleanser. So something funny, something lighthearted, something that's going to make them comfortable because I am aware that we live in rural Maine and I don't want the women in my life driving home alone in the dark and then thinking that they're like going to encounter some sort of serial killer. I want them to kind of regulate, get back into a place where they feel safe and happy, and then can go back out into the world. I also think it's really important, like we heard in several of these articles that there's this idea of a sweet spot. So the idea of like you have the ability to control that situation, stop it whenever it is. Like you can turn off the TV, you can pause things if something gets really intense, but then also not wanting it to be not scary at all. But there was a definite horror sweet spot that they found in research where it had to be scary enough that it could like trigger your adrenaline, like you really are having a reaction, but not so scary that you felt out of control. And I thought that was really interesting because, yeah, safety is really important. You want to enjoy something. With recreational fear, I think control is a really big thing. And so I have panic disorder, and I have found ever since I was little, like I've been having panic attacks since I was 7. I really love horror films and I love scary literature. Like I love horror literature. And I've found that it's a wonderful way to focus on something else. I'm going to have these heightened feelings all the time anyway, but in a horror film, there is this idea that it's contained. You see something, you understand the situation, you see it be dealt with, and then it ends. And you can feel that same adrenaline rush as if you were in that situation in real life, but it's far enough away from your real life that it can give you release and then actually alleviate the symptoms and signs of anxiety for an extended period afterwards, in the same way that, let's say, you were able to do something else like, I know cycling used to be a big thing for me when I was having panic attacks. In order to regulate, you change your breathing up, you move through it, and then you have like a great period of calm, and it can trigger that same feeling of calm in people, which I find really interesting. I just really loved that. And it's really just kind of both a bonding film. So I also think that can go into how we feel about horror movies. There's a great article from Vice, Abby Moss wrote in 2017, where she talked about her love of horror movies and the importance of like that in bonding her with all her friends. Like you get together, you watch a horror movie, you get through it together. And it kind of works, but you feel safe in that. And then having those fond memories of being with people that you love and care about and like getting through the situation together can propel you to have even more positive feelings about horror movies or haunted houses, or you're associating that more with that experience, which is a very different, my friends were like, we're all going to get scared together and we're really excited about it. But if it gets too scary, we're going to turn on TV off. And maybe your friends didn't do that, where you might not have that like positive association. I feel like you would have liked our horror movies a lot
I
more.
feel like I need to join. And actually, it's interesting that you brought up about how it kind of calms you down and soothes you, because one of the articles that we were reading, it said they call it a stress recalibration. So you're kind of like recalibrating your body, like realigning everything, which we can also link all the resources in the description. So that way you can read these articles for yourself. It's really interesting to look at the science behind it. And you know what? You're right. Like my friends didn't make me feel comfortable in the situations. If anything, they did the opposite. So I have PTSD, and so I'm very scared easily. And so for some people that really, really helps to have that horror movie to have the control circumstances, in order to, be able to experience those negative emotions in those control circumstances, really have that control over them and feel like no one else has that control over their fear. That can be very empowering and very powerful for a lot of people. However, in my situation, I already was on such hypervigilant high alert. I was already scared, pressured into not wanting to do it. And then my friends would think it was funny. In one instance, I went out to the kitchen to get something, and my friend went outside, went up to the window, and knocked on the window to scare me. That is an example of not feeling safe in that situation, and how important, and science has shown us that how important it is to feel like you actually have control, to feel like these situations aren't real, to feel like you can stop this fear at any point. You can turn off the film and put something nice on, and to feel safe and comfortable in your environment. So that is just such a big thing that we have discussed, and I think that that makes something I didn't really think about, that yes, horror movies do scare me, but also maybe if I tried them in a safer setting where I felt more comfortable, they wouldn't scare me so much.
Yeah, and Matthias Claesen, Dr. Matthias Claesen, apologies, from Aarhus. I had to Google how to pronounce that, so I'm going to say it as much as I can throughout this episode.
I love that for you.
He really talks about a little bit. There was an idea a few years ago that somebody said, could treating anxiety or exposure therapy be linked to horror films? Which he was like, baby steps. If that's something you want to do, don't feel pressured. If you're arachnophobic and you're like, I would like to deal with these feelings in a controlled setting, it's do what's comfortable for you. I would talk to a doctor. I feel like I'm good with the things I'm afraid of, just like not dealing with that. But if you're interested, you can read some of our information. He said the most important thing is baby steps, feeling comfortable and not pushing yourself or feeling shame or fear around that choice. So I mean, and when we talk about safety too, I think a big thing for me, in previous jobs, have to drive a lot at night. And one thing that I love that keeps me awake and alert is I listen to horror books being read aloud on audiobook as I drive. But if I'm in rural Waldo County and I take a wrong turn and I end up on a dirt road, then I'm going to turn that off because I don't feel safe. And that did happen. And then that I felt a little foolish because I realized I'm in the middle of nowhere and I'm listening to something that has really heightened my reaction. And we got to calm down now. So you have to be careful with yourself and enjoy it if you do, but also feel no pressure to ever need to do that if it isn't something that you naturally want.
And no, you're good. It's really interesting that you say that you listen to, books about true crime or true crime podcast. I listen to podcasts about finances, and that's its own level of horror, realizing I'm doing everything wrong. No, so I think that it's been super great to talk about and really work through the different ways that anxiety affects how we react to horror movies, but also about how the environment definitely does. I think that's such a great point. You're not forced to watch horror movies at all. You do not have to do it. And, if someone's pressuring you to watch horror movies, just leave. You do not have to do it. And it's okay. I am very much admit that horror movies scare me, and it's okay. I'm not ashamed of it. It's taken me a long time to get to that place because I used to be ashamed of it when I was younger, but now I'm not ashamed of it. I am okay with the fact that I do not like horror movies. But it is also very important to, think about that environment, think about the control. And like you said, if it's something you want to do, take some baby steps and really just kind of figure out ways that could be something that, you could be more comfortable in. So it's been really great to talk to you about horror movies and anxiety and really just kind of work through some different ways that horror movies do affect our anxiety or soothe our anxiety, which is also affecting it. But.
Yeah. And I would love to hear on the poll, we'll put one up, what your favorite horror movie is. If we could ask that question, I would love to hear from you guys. And also whether or not this is something that works for you. Because I know in my previous job where I was a sexual violence advocate, for survivors, we were very torn. But I would say the most anxious people that I worked with loved horror. I mean, loved talking about that. And it really confused everyone else that we worked with. They were like, why would you knowingly put yourself in that situation? And it's like, well, let's talk about Matthias Clayson, okay? He's got information. So, yeah, we'll list all of our sources in the description. And stay spooky if you want.
We need to do our fun fact. Okay. But before we do that, sorry, I highlighted one more quote that I really think is really good right before Halloween. I feel like you should take this advice. Maybe don't. But it says there's data showing that when you go on a first date and you go to a scary place, that you end up feeling closer to one another. Mm-hmm. And it's you get a stronger bond than if you go to some place ordinary and boring. So just some advice, maybe go to a haunted house. I mean, again, don't pressure someone. But I'm going to leave you with that advice because I thought that was very interesting.
I loved that. They said that people, often strangers going through haunted houses, have been recorded as becoming very close, friendly, even though they're strangers, or like holding each other's hands. Where you're going through this intense experience together, it can make a kind of affectionate vibe. Which I was like, what? Bond. Like we all got through this together, and I mean, don't meet up in like an empty warehouse, but dark if that's alley. Something that you can work, it's a good try.
And be safe if someone invites you someplace scary. So fun fact. Do you have a fun fact ready?
My fun fact is I know all the words to the film Darby O'Gill and the Little People.
I've never seen that before.
It's a great film about an elderly caretaker with a daughter that he takes care of who's falling in love with Sean Connery and his relationship with the king of the leprechauns. And I'm just going to say King Pride and Naknashika is a real pill. I love him.
Oh, I got to put that on my list. I love movies.
It's from like 1964. It's a Disney film, and it's one of the first films that Sean Connery.
I was going to say, I feel like 1964. I'm surprised.
It's right
by
after
that.
he won like Mr. Goodbody. It's a great film. I used to recite it continuously as a child. Is my favorite movie.
I love that.
Very into leprechauns.
No, I love that so much. Just not the Leprechaun horror movie. We don't have to talk about that one. Can't stand that.
It's so offensive. They're very troubling films. But A Wonderful Person, the main actor is a lovely person, as we all know.
So my fun fact is like not really about me, but I went to see Casper over the weekend, and I had not seen that film in so long. I saw it
so romantic
at the main film center, and it was really fun. And I took my 5-year-old, but I did not realize it takes place in Friendship, Maine.
Yeah,
I had no idea. So that's the fun fact. It's not about me, but that Casper takes place in Friendship, Maine. So I thought that was really cool. And also, Maine is always always like the horror capital. Like people always put scary movies. I know Casper isn't a scary movie, but it's about ghosts, and they always a lot of people put them in Maine. So I just find it interesting that that's the setting.
And I love that all of Stephen King's books take place in Maine. And you're gonna say The Shining.
I was just gonna say, but The Shining.
Guess what? The Shining does the beginning and the end of the book take place in Maine. They just don't note it in the film. That's where she retires with the groundskeeper, who survives as well. And then they move there, the three of them, back to Maine, into the Lakes region. So
that's good to know.
Can't catch me there.
Catch me outside. How about that? Anyways, we should probably cut that
real
part.
Weird at the end.
Thank you so much for listening, and hope to hear from you in our poll, and hope you read some of the resources, and can't wait to see you next time.
Have fun. Happy
Halloween! Woo! We didn't even plan that.